Now in the middle of 2024, Ocala is the fastest growing city in Florida. But on today's video, I'm going to tell you the reason why it's the fastest growing city, and I'm going to debunk the myth that Ocala is growing because it's a good and attractive place to live. Now we already know the spin that the realtors and magazines and builders are going to give this news story. Ocala is the fastest growing city in Florida because it's the greatest place in Florida. Hey, you should move to Ocala. It's growing like crazy. The only reason Ocala is growing is because it's the southernmost city that people can afford to live in. Ocala doesn't even have beaches. It doesn't have attractions. It doesn't have industries. Ocala is a place for people who can't afford Orlando, can't afford Tampa, can't afford Miami, can't afford South Florida to move to Ocala because they don't want to end up too far from South Florida. They like the culture of South Florida. They like living in South Florida, but they can't afford it. You go too north into Florida and you're practically in Bamsuck, Alabama, and nobody wants to live there. There's absolutely nothing about the Ocala area that would make you put a pin on and say, that's where I want to live. The reason Ocala is growing is because it's the only place that is still affordable, relatively close to South Florida. The people that are moving to Ocala from South Florida are mostly Puerto Ricans and Cubans, people who grew up either in Puerto Rico or Cuba, and then they came to Orlando or Miami. These are people who have only lived in large metropolitan areas. Puerto Rico is economically not the best place to live. Cuba is a poor country, one of the poorest in the world. So when people come from Puerto Rico, Cuba, and other Caribbean islands, and they end up in South Florida, a very expensive place, and then they move to Ocala, they're going to think it's a wonderland because it's actually affordable compared to South Florida, and it's somewhat rural, and they are coming from urban populated areas, dense population areas. So when they move to Ocala, of course they think it's a wonderland, because they've never lived in a rural area. They've never experienced being on a road that doesn't have traffic. But does that mean that Ocala is a great place to live? No, it just means that from the perspective of the people that are moving there, it's better from where they're coming from. I don't know if you guys know this, but growth right now in Florida is not a good thing. The places that are growing the fastest in Florida right now are places like Polk County and Ocala. These are the most undesirable poor people places to live in the state. The reason people are moving to these places is because they simply cannot afford the cost of living in South Florida, on top of the lack of industry that makes a place expensive, even though there aren't any jobs. And by the way, Ocala isn't this wonderland of industry in Florida. There's literally no industry in Ocala, but at least it isn't as competitive as South Florida, where you depend solely on tourism. So the notion that Ocala is growing because it's this great, amazing place to live, that's not realistic. Ocala is growing because people cannot afford to live in South Florida, and they're relocating as far north as they can without going too far north and ending up in the Confederacy. Analytically, the Ocala area ain't crap. They have one of the highest drug overdose death rates in the state of Florida. Consistently, Marion County has been among the top counties in Florida for drug overdoses. And the north central section of Florida, around the area of Ocala, has had for years now the highest drug overdose death rate. This is like the trashiest, most drugged out part of Florida. Sumter County, right next door, has a higher homicide rate than Miami. These counties in north central Florida analytically are bad. These are areas that have never been attractive. The only reason people move to Florida is to be near amazing beaches. Ocala doesn't have amazing beaches. The only natural attraction that Ocala has is the natural springs, and these parks get so crowded, even finding a parking spot is literally impossible. Whether you're going to Silver Springs or you're going to Dunellen, the Rainbow River, or even Weeki Wachee, all these springs are packed with people. You can't even get a parking spot half the time. The only reason the population is actually growing around Ocala is because they'll build you a house for less than $300,000. You just can't find that in South Florida right now. And Ocala is, again, not analytically an attractive place. So these aren't really good growth analytics. It has to grow because people can't afford to live in other parts of Florida. And even renting in Ocala is considerably as expensive as other parts of Florida. If you're renting, you might as well come up with a few extra $100 a month and be in a beach town instead of ending up in Ocala. The people that are moving to Ocala right now, a lot of them are Hispanics. Now, over the long term, this influx of Hispanics will lower the homicide rate. It will lower the overdose death rate, but predominantly it is still a white area, and a white area that is plagued with addiction. So for now, the people that are moving in are going to have a lot of pushback. These people that live in Ocala area right now, the natives, they're mostly just people whose parents retired in Florida affordably. A lot of them are strung out on drugs, and when all these Hispanics move in and they start buying houses and doing things, you think some drug addict who hasn't accomplished anything with his life is gonna like somebody to move into their town, start building and buying houses and starting businesses and being successful in their faces while they've been a failure for decades? Of course not. You have a lot of tension between the people that are moving and the people that are already there, because the people that are already there really haven't accomplished much. They're the children of people who retired in Florida affordably, and a lot of those people really haven't done anything with their lives. These aren't people that went out there and got careers and got jobs and made lives for themselves. These are people that are waiting for Meemaw to die so they can inherit that trailer up on that hill. Now, I want you guys who are moving to Florida to understand this. Us Hispanics are discriminated and unwanted in the United States. So when we move to an area, we're not moving to an area because it's amazing. We're moving to an area because we don't have any options. We're being economically discriminated in Florida, not so much socially, but definitely economically. These counties in South Florida have the worst economic equality by race. So these are not people that are moving to Ocala for better options because they like it more. They're moving to Ocala because things are limited. Florida's a difficult state to live, even more if you're a minority. And these up and coming communities like the Cubans and the Puerto Ricans are trying to make something out of nothing in places they're unwanted. So if you're moving to Ocala because the population is growing, you need to understand that the reason the population is growing in Ocala is because people who have very little economical outlets are being pushed into Ocala as South Florida gets more expensive. The rich people keep buying out South Florida and making things more difficult for everybody to live in. Insurance rates are going up. They're doing everything they can to make South Florida the most expensive place to live so that they can push the poor people out. Ocala isn't growing because it's this majestic, attractive place everybody wants to move to. Ocala is growing because options are thin and few. Polk County, Ocala, they're kind of close to South Central Florida, but they're not really in South Florida. It's the best place people can move to. Communities that are economically, analytically marginalized. Population growth is not a good analytic, especially in 2024 when people are moving to places not because they want to live there. People don't want to freaking live in Ocala. People want to live in California by the mountains, or in Florida in a beach town, or in Colorado in the mountains. Those are the places people want to live. There's a difference between what people want and what people have. Don't have any other options. They have to end up in these places. In general, analytically speaking, Central Florida is possibly the worst part of the state. It's a part of the state that has the most drug overdoses. Homicide rates in the central part of the state are now looking worse than the larger cities, if you can wrap your head around that. There's a few analytics that are more significant than population growth. Natural beauty and safety are two factors that really make a place attractive. Ocala doesn't have none of those things. When you look at the most expensive real estate in the country, San Diego, San Francisco, South Florida, New York City, these areas have a few things that make them attractive. For a lot of those areas, natural beauty. For other areas, industries. All of those areas, safety. For example, for San Diego, California, a very large city, the homicide rate is 4 people per every 100,000. Now that's the city limits of San Diego. Now Marion County, the entire county of Ocala, is 8.4. That means that you're 2 times more likely to be murdered anywhere in Marion County than you are to be murdered in San Diego, California. Now 8.4 is only a little bit above the national average. It's not like Ocala is this dangerous place. It's really not. But counties in South Florida like Sarasota, Collier, and Martin are at less than 4 per 100,000. These are very safe places, just like San Diego, California. So you are leaving an area that is below the national average to an area that's above the national average. You're going from a very safe community to a leaning towards not the safest communities. Now, the homicide rate in Marion County is still higher than Miami-Dade, still higher than Broward, still higher than Palm Beach, still higher than Fort Myers. That being Lee County, Florida. So it's not as safe as South Florida. Sumter County, right outside of Ocala, that's the area of the villages and all that, their homicide rate is now like 11 per 100,000. Most of those homicides are happening at family disputes. And in this category, this area really looks bad analytically. There's just a lot of, not so much on the street violence, but like within the family violence, because the area is plagued with addiction. But here's where things are going to switch up on you if you're leaving South Florida and going to Ocala. Marion County's drug overdose death rate is 62 per 100,000, which is more than 5 times higher than Miami-Dade. Yes, if you're leaving Miami-Dade and you're putting your family in Ocala, they are going to be visually appreciating 5 times more overdoses per capita than in Miami. That is crazy. Marion County has the second highest drug overdose death rate in the entire state of Florida. Only Pensacola, Escambria County, has a higher drug overdose death rate. And that's in the Central Florida region, a region of the state that's plagued with addiction. That number is almost twice the state average. This isn't a normal amount of, drug overdoses. No, dude, Ocala is the epicenter of drug addiction in Florida. Even if you look at Pensacola, it's one single county all by itself at the end of Florida. Ocala is surrounded by all the other high-ranking counties. This is the epicenter of drug addiction in the state of Florida, with a rate nearly twice higher than the state average. Now, Marion County is a large county. It's one of the largest counties in Florida. If Marion County just happened to be its own state, it would have the second highest overdose death rate in the country. Only West Virginia would be higher. Be higher than Tennessee, be higher than Kentucky. Just to give you some comparables, the state of Oregon is 31 per 100,000. The state of Washington is 33 per 100,000. You might have heard Fox News say something like, oh, Washington and Oregon are plagued with drug addiction. Well, the drug overdose death rate in Marion County is 2 times higher. So just get your head around the idea that you're moving to a place that's absolutely plagued with drug addiction. And drug addiction comes with a lot of other problems. One of the biggest problems that people have in this area is that they can't even keep a freaking lawnmower outside their house. Anything that you leave outside your property that can be stolen will be stolen. You can buy a house on a country road miles from anything, and junkies will literally walk through the woods at night to find your property and steal something from your shed at 2 or 3 in the morning, even though they are miles from anything. They'll literally just walk into the middle of nowhere and creep around at night. If you watch the Facebook groups from the Ocala area, that's what happens. People have trail cameras on their woods in the backyard, and in the middle of the night, somebody comes in a bicycle, creep into their yard, stealing stuff out of sheds. Now, anybody who lives in Ocala and thinks it's a great place to live, remember, I'm not giving you an opinion. I'm giving you raw numbers and analytics that are letting you know that this area is an undesirable place to live. And a lot of people that move to Ocala are coming from places that are way worse. So from their perspective, it's better. But it can never compare to living in a beach county in Florida that has half the homicide rate, half the drug overdose rate. The only pipe we're seeing here in South Florida is an umbrella being stuck in the sand by the beach, not a crack pipe behind a 7-Eleven. The reality is that there really is nothing to do in this area. Yes, it's growing, but no, it's not for any good reason. In reality, this area needs to make the headlines for how much drug addiction and death is happening here more than for why it's actually growing. Of course, the builders and developers are going to tell you Ocala's growing because it's amazing, but in reality, it's growing because people don't have any other options. And that really is the case for all of the places that are growing in Florida right now. In fact, the more attractive places in Florida are seeing a reduction in their population, and it's coming mostly from population density. It means instead of 7 people living in a house, now it's 2 people because it's going from a bad neighborhood to a better neighborhood. And that is the truth of why Ocala is the fastest growing area in Florida. Is it going to continue to grow? Absolutely. The more difficult life becomes in South Florida, the more people are going to try to find a way out. My advice to you is figure out a way to pay your high expensive rents in South Florida, enjoy the beaches and the nice things we have here, because Ocala ain't the place I would personally want to end up. And you know, coming from somebody who travels a lot, Ocala isn't even a fun place to go. If I'm in Broward County, I'm excited. I'm in Miami, I'm excited. I'm in Orlando, I'm excited. I'm in Tampa, I'm excited. I'm in Jacksonville, I'm excited. Bro, there's no excitement in being in Ocala. Being in Ocala is like, okay, what's next? There's nothing to do here. The restaurants aren't that great. The culture doesn't exist. There's nothing really beautiful or scenic about the area. Oh, maybe an oak tree here or there. Okay, whatever. The state of Florida has a lot of downsides, but one of the upsides of living in Florida is the beautiful beaches and fun cities. If you're going to live in Florida, live somewhere fun. To live in Florida and then end up in Ocala, you might as well at this point move to freaking Alabama or Mississippi. I don't know what to tell you. And look, I'm happy for Ocala. I'm happy it's making this transformation from some backwards Alabama, Mississippi vibe type of place to a more cosmopolitan feel. I'm glad Ocala is making this transformation, but I don't want to be part of it. Oh, and by the way, you're not actually going to move to the city of Ocala. Most of the city limits is a hood. You're going to move to like somewhere in Marion County, some little undeveloped little grid pattern of streets somewhere that never got filled in, that probably won't be filled in for another 40 years because that's how much land there is out there. So you're not actually moving to the city of Ocala. You're moving to like somewhere in the vicinity of Ocala. Let's just get that understood. Yeah, seriously not worth it. And again, if you have no other option, well, then that's all you get in life. But if you are moving to Ocala thinking it's a great place because you read an article about it, bless your heart.